Good evening, Santa Cruz County. My name is Sandino Gomez. I'll be your host tonight for Voices from the Village, community television's long-running public affairs talk television show. And tonight's topic will be focusing primarily on the immigration reform legislation working its way through the Congress of the United States. But also we're going to be touching on a lot of other immigration-related issues, including a recent decision by the United States Supreme Court around voting rights in Arizona. We're going to be talking a little bit about our own Day Worker Center here locally in Santa Cruz. And we have two really informed and educated, knowledgeable guests here to talk from the Santa Cruz County Immigration Action Coalition. That's right. Yes, the Immigration Action Coalition of Santa Cruz County. We have with us here tonight, I'll introduce them before we go to our Word on the Street segment, Mireya Gomez Contreras, who is a local activist and member of the Immigration Action Coalition, Santa Cruz County. Welcome, Mireya.
Thank you.
And to Mireya's left, we have Paul Johnston. He's a public sociologist by training and trade, and also an activist about town, wearing many different sort of labor, immigrant-related hats. Welcome to the show,
Thank
Paul.
you.
Yeah. On our show, this is a public affairs talk show, so we really do love to think kind of what do you have to say about the topic, Santa Cruz? So I believe we have a special segment prepared, Voices from the Streets, right here in Santa Cruz, and we'll be right back after this to hear some reactions and then dive right into the heart of the topic, the immigration reform, again, working its way through Congress. So we'll be right back after this.
This is Voices from the Village. We're in downtown Santa Cruz, and we're asking people, what do you think about the immigration situation in this country?
Well, certainly something needs to be done. Status quo isn't a great situation. And certainly the right-wing view of the whole thing is not very humanitarian. But we do have laws and we do have boundaries, and but we're a caring nation, so we do have to have a loving approach to these people, especially families that have had kids born here. Mm-hmm. It's just ridiculous to have to have them live in any type of fear that parents could be deported or anything like that. We got to change the rules and move on.
I feel everyone should have a chance to come here and make their way in America.
Well, I think anybody's welcome to come live in our country as long as they have the right qualifications and definitely do what we require any immigrant to do. I think that it's really a shame that we have a lot of immigrants here that are not documented, that are taking advantage of all of our goods and well-beings and things like that. So that's just kind of how I feel about the immigration situation.
I think the Republicans are making a lot of trouble, and there's no need to be spent. Everything I read says there's no need to be spending $30 billion to improve security on the border when it's quite clear that immigration is balanced out. So as many people are leaving, there is coming. So even people on the border, some of them are saying we're not seeing that many illegal immigrants now. I mean, I think this is overkill, but this is how politics works in the U.S., Democrats are happy to spend a bunch of money to get Republican votes. That's what it takes. Crazy, but that's the world we live in.
I'm an immigrant.
Oh, okay. And I'll tell you what, I went with her to go do all of her things in our immigration office. And if I had to go through the humiliation that those people were going through, I wouldn't become a citizen. It was a humiliating experience. It's been a few years, but it was.
Well, I wasn't born here, so I'm an immigrant. I moved here when I was 4. I'm still not a citizen. I'm a German citizen, and I have a green card. So yeah, I think this country was built on immigrants and people coming here and bringing their diversity here, and I think it's a shame that we're trying to stop that in more harsh ways than is necessary.
Well, immigration is what built our country, and I think it's give and take. I mean, we need regulation, but people abuse the system, and I just think that with the proper, it's hard to regulate the borders, but we need immigration, I think, for our country to flourish.
That's what people had to say in Santa Cruz today. Back to you in the studio.
And thank you so much, Annie. That was our hardworking correspondent on the streets. Interesting stuff we heard there, huh? Santa Cruz is always good for an earful. Something that struck me was definitely kind of a sentiment that sort of the status quo, I think in fact the first person said the status quo isn't working. And that seems like a kind of unifying sentiment, even amongst the various political spectrum that we have in this country around the whole debate around immigration. Most people feel that the system is broken. You guys, any thoughts to that?
It is broken.
It is?
It's broken and it's complicated. You know,
Yeah.
one of the things that I picked up from the responses out on the street is just that people do want to see the system fixed, and I mean, they want something to be done, and they want it to be done in a way that is considerate of families, you know, keeping families together, and considerate of the fact that immigrants are here and they're really contributing in a lot of ways. So I'm not surprised that actually is a lot of what came through in the interviews there. Santa Cruz County is really known for open arms. I mean, I do wonder once it's closer to home if those would still be the comments made, but I'm not surprised that those were the comments.
Yeah, I guess I think it's been broken for a long time, and it's been recognized that we've had terrible lives for millions of people in our country who live in conditions without rights and work, and because of that, often in bad conditions, live in fear of deportation sometimes, and that's not new.
Right.
What's new is the political power of immigrants who increasingly are becoming citizens, voting. In the 10 years after Proposition 187 passed in California, 1,300,000 people became citizens here in California because they were legal permanent residents who wanted to be able to vote.
Right.
And their children are now growing up and voting too. So it was I think it's been pretty well recognized that it was the growing political power of the Latino community that has forced Congress and the president to finally attempt to move on this, and it was the cutting edge, really, that has impressed me the most is the young immigrants, the children of immigrants, who are more capable in some ways than their parents have been of expressing themselves and inspiring others too, who have really held President Obama's feet to the fire, and Dianne Feinstein's and other Democratic as well as Republican elected officials. So I think the credit for this potential breakthrough goes to the immigrant community itself.
Yeah, I mean, all across the country, you hear about these amazing actions being taken by both undocumented folk as well as their supporters who are, you know, risking arrest and deportation to make a political point. I mean, it's very clear that the kind of political will, both in the community and as a result of the will being in the community, it's now being expressed outside the community and
that's right. They call themselves dreamers,
right? And
they're inspiring the rest of us
to not only dream but take action as well, which is really inspiring, I think. Well, you know, we're talking about the immigration reform, and I think it's maybe this is a question for you, Paul. You know, we've had these two larger immigration reforms in the past, you know, the amnesties as they're often referred to, which weren't exactly straight amnesties, but what are sort of the main proponents of this bill currently working its way through Congress? Because it's not amnesty by any means. It's going to be a very long process. There's penalties involved. There's a whole, seems like a kind of this for that structure going on inside of this bill. So could you talk to us a little bit about the comprehensive immigration reform package that is working its way through Congress? And I know that's a huge topic.
Yeah, I'm not going to attempt to even.
You don't have to summarize it all, but what are some of the main points that I think, or you think are worth sharing?
Well, the most significant thing is that a significant number of the people who are here now without papers will become provisional legal residents. And eventually, and it appears now after 10 years for most of them, would qualify to become permanent legal residents. And then after another period of time, for the most of them, 5 years, would be eligible to apply for U.S. citizenship. Right. And that would be accelerated for some groups, for the young people who were brought to here by their parents as children. There's about a little over 1 million of them yet. And for farm workers who are working in the fields and stay in the fields, will have a special status that'll accelerate it a bit. And for people who go in the military and such, probably leaving still a few million out of the people who are now without papers. So it'll probably mean about 8 million people will not certainly have full citizenship rights, aside from the fact that they won't be able to vote. They won't be even eligible for things like the Affordable Care Act. Right. But they will no longer have to live in fear, and they'll be able to start expressing themselves and participating in public life, and that will be a huge change for us, I think, and it'll be a huge change, of course, for those families. Even something as simple as being able to go home and visit your parents in Mexico and come back without fear of being caught on the border and being deported, that is a life-transforming experience.
Absolutely.
For folks who haven't seen their parents. Many times people have brought their kids up here in the States and they've never been able to show their kids the village where they come from in Oaxaca or wherever. And so that's going to be a great day.
Well, people have had, I know personally some people who have not been able to travel back to their countries, and their parents have passed away, and they didn't get a chance to say goodbye or give them a hug or see them one last time.
But then on the other side, there will probably be, if it is passed, it'll be a compromise between the Democrats and the Republicans, and it's already clear that there will be very, very onerous enforcement legislation contained in this bill, so that in some ways I think civil rights issues that we're facing now are just going to be intensified, and there will still be a deportation regime that will probably be intensified. So by no means will all of the problems be solved. I think we'll just have a new context within which some people will enjoy more rights, and hopefully we will all be more empowered to help protect people's civil rights.
So I'm answering my own question here, in a way, because I know the difference, but maybe one of you all could explain the difference between Obama's executive decision that he made recently, because I was talking about the show in preparation for the show with some friends, and one of them was confused and thought that this had already happened. Like Obama passed the reform, and I'm like, Obama doesn't pass legislation. You know, hello, he's his executive branch, legislative branch, judicial. We have these three branches. You know, there's a misconception, I guess, at least among some of the people I've been talking to, about this. Could either one of you explain the difference between Obama's Deferred Action Program and this legislation process again?
The Deferred Action Program is just an exercise of what they call administrative discretion by the Department of Homeland Security, literally to defer any action to deport somebody, just saying it's not our priority. And because of that, they're giving people work permits and essentially enabling them on a renewable basis to be confident that they won't be deported. But this is something that could be reversed like that. It's not even a formal presidential executive order. Right. And it doesn't by any means give people the basic rights of citizenship. And of course it only applies to a very limited proportion of the population too, about 1.3 million people.
Out of the population of estimated between 11 and 12 million, something around there?
That's right. Yeah.
So it is, you know, maybe 10% of these folks.
That's right. That's right. Yeah. Okay. So it's huge. For here on the Central Coast, there are perhaps 10,000 of these folks. Most of them are high school students or people who've just recently graduated from or dropped out of high school, and people into their 20s who, if they file the paperwork, can get a work permit, get a driver's license, which means they can get better jobs. The key, I think one of the really positive elements of this program is that they have to be graduates from school, or they have to be enrolled in high school, or its equivalent, or even in a job training program. And so for a lot of these young people, this provides very good incentive to get back into school, and it provides hope that they will be able to get a good job and support a family, and they won't have to find illegal ways of making income under the table.
I talked to a young man who was himself undocumented and thinking, like, there's no point in me finishing school.
And
I'm not going to be able to get a job. I'm not going to be able to do any of these things that I'd like to do that I'm supposed to be able to do with an education. So
for the folks who are eligible,
that's a good thing.
This changes that. So it's a step. Like so many things, though, in immigration reform, it's one step And there are other steps that still need to be taken.
Certainly.
So it's a step forward, though, certainly.
Cool. I heard Angela Davis speak recently at UCSC. I think it was the Practical Activism Conference, I think in the fall. But she identified immigration as sort of like the civil rights issue of the 21st century, the times we're living in today. I'm paraphrasing, but she said something around the lens of, these people aren't even second-class citizens because citizens have these rights and protections and aren't deported for their crimes, whereas these people are living in this entire underclass in the shadow economy, totally vulnerable to exploitation, completely open to, shenanigans, shall we say, just nefarious things happening to them. And I just kind of want to hear you guys' reactions. Maybe Mireya, I know you've worked within a lot of different groups beyond the Immigration Action Coalition. I mean, what's your reaction to her saying that this is the civil rights issue of the?
Well, first of all, I do want to say that we did make an attempt to get some another speaker or two to join our table today, and I myself called about a half a dozen people and invited them to come on, and because of reasons related to their immigration status, they didn't feel safe to be on this show. And I think that says a lot. I mean, we are in Santa Cruz, and I did say this is a safe space and this is a conversation, but I think that speaks a lot to what you both have already mentioned about how undocumented people are living in the shadows, and they get pushed deeper into the shadows. For example, with students or the person you mentioned who doesn't feel motivation to finish high school because really there isn't. Or
what's there
at least
them?
Before,
yeah.
Sorry, at least before the DREAM Act, maybe there wasn't anything beyond that. But I'm the director of the Day Worker Center, which was just newly opened here in Santa Cruz County, and one of our main goals there is to do just that, to prevent the different kinds of abuses that do happen on a very regular basis out at the informal hiring sites between employers and some undocumented day laborers that do different kinds of work.
Right.
And so that definitely is a reality.
And not just different kinds of work. I mean, essential work that happens all across all sorts of different sectors of our economy. I mean, people think just traditionally agriculture for the undocumented folk, but they are, all over other sectors of our economy.
Oh, yeah. I often have wondered what it might look like to see a map. If undocumented people were painted one color and documented people were painted a different color, we would just see a lot of the undocumented population color all over the map, and we really are surrounded.
Increasingly all over the map. Although the reality also is that map would, in the Pajaro Valley and especially the Salinas Valley, it would be very, very thick because that's the highest concentration of undocumented residents in California is here on the Central Coast. And it's because of agriculture. It's because the folks who work in agriculture and our richest, most profitable industry, the source of all that wealth, especially over there in Carmel and that area, is the product. It couldn't exist if it weren't for undocumented folks who've been relied upon in one way or another from Mexico for more than half a century now. And I think a lot of us hope that when people have basic rights, that the conditions of work in the field will change, and in food processing, and in the other industries that hotels and day laborers and restaurants, etc. That people will begin to have the confidence and the support to exercise the rights that they haven't been able to exercise till now.
Maybe you guys could tell us a little bit about the Immigration Action Coalition and sort of what it's been doing locally here in Santa Cruz County, but also some of maybe like the issues that you're taking on as part of supporting this legislation, or how are our local elected officials standing on these issues? Like, could you guys touch on a little bit of the work of the IAC here locally?
Well, the Immigration Action Coalition is, formed maybe about 2 or 3 years ago. I actually came on board maybe about 1.5 years ago. And we mostly are a network of different organizations that share information and keep each other updated and try to, do communicate with local electeds to try and really pressure them to publicly support, for example, the Trust Act, which we've been working on for, gosh, since it's come onto the radar, you know. And we do put on an immigration forum a couple of times a year, and there definitely is a lot more work to do. And so we're hoping to be able to grow our capacity, especially in this time where a lot might be changing in the very near future. And depending on what the outcome is, we definitely want to be ready to be able to respond to different questions that come from the community about what's happening, how the law is going to be implemented on the ground, and where people can go to find out more information. So I think the community should really stay on the lookout for more information about our role in this, around this issue.
Yeah, I guess just to add a little bit to that, Medea mentioned the Trust Act, and that was a response to the problem that I think inspired a number of us to get involved with the Immigration Action Coalition, and that is the deportation program in our jail, through which our sheriff participates with ICE in detaining and deporting mostly people who have not been convicted of any serious crime, simply because they're out of status. And that's something that's going on all over the country, and it's a real scandal. The Trust Act would limit that. It's a state legislation which we're on the verge, we hope, getting finally passed and signed by the governor, that will limit the sheriff's ability to do that.
Wow.
The other thing that we've been doing is working with the Santa Cruz Immigration Project, Santa Cruz County Immigration Project, SCIP, in Watsonville, and they're providing legal resources for us to do we've trained hundreds of young people, mostly dreamers, to help each other and help themselves with their paperwork for the DACA program. So we've done DACA clinics all over the region, not only Santa Cruz County, but also Monterey County and San Benito County. And through this, we're building a network of volunteers and institutions and leaders and organizations, unions, churches, local government, to especially schools, to do in a small scale what we're going to need to prepare to do on a very large scale if immigration reform passes. And that's to mobilize our community to help people help themselves with the paperwork, because there's absolutely no way that can be done by lawyers and such.
We heard from the woman in the video talking about the kind of humiliating experience of filing the paperwork and the interviews and the kind of process of being a citizen. And you know, it's funny because I heard I don't remember the exact comedian's phrasing, but he says, immigrants make the best citizens because they actually know when the Battle of 1812 was. They know who the 23rd president was and what the main platform of the New Deal was. I mean, they have this knowledge and perhaps an appreciation of our own government and system that really most citizens either don't know or take for granted. So maybe we could talk a little bit about kind of some other actions or interesting things that you see happening on a state level, unless you felt like there was more to say about the sort of larger immigration reform working its way through the federal Congress. I mean, are there interesting things happening on a state level that you guys know of or heard happening?
Well, I wanted actually to just touch real quickly on what the recent amendment to the immigration reform bill, which is the border surge amendment. And I wanted to hear what you thought of it, but really that amendment was focused on getting some more Republican support, for the bill. And it's going to just really militarize our border, our southern border, so much
even more
tightly, right. And there's also the question related to that about whether or not that's going to happen before the citizenship process for a lot of people, or for all of the people that qualify, or not. And so I'm just curious about what will happen on Thursday when the decision is made about whether if this moves on to the House or not. Go ahead.
Just for those folks that might not know, why is militarizing the border? Why would you be for or against that?
Well, I mean,
I think we can answer that question ourselves, but I'm just for our viewers, why would you oppose militarizing the border?
Well, first of all, gosh, the amount of resources that are going towards putting up another 700 miles of fencing on the border and adding, 400,000 more patrols at the border. There's so much more. I mean, those resources could really be routed to supporting people inside the country to be able to, well, first of all, this is a question that's coming from some of the people that I know. If the immigration law does pass, where are the resources going to be coming from to help those people that are applying for citizenship, right, over the course of those 20 years or so, to meet all of the requirements, right? I think nonprofit organizations are one of the sectors that are going to be quickly responding and supporting and guiding and maybe directing undocumented people to complete that process. But on their own, it's going to be a difficult process to navigate. So, I mean, I don't know what will happen. And I'm trying to keep my ears close to both mainstream news and alternative news, but definitely the resources that are being spent on the border
can be better used.
Could be better used, one. And, you know, honestly, people have been crossing the border and finding very creative ways to do so for so many years, you know. And I mean, I've heard of tunnels being, well, I know this is true, tunnels are being dug underneath the fencing there, and people are getting through that way. So I don't know if that will really help the situation, you know.
I spend a certain amount of time, a lot of time actually, and I have over the years because I've been working toward immigration reform and studying the past efforts and trying to learn from what we did well and what we didn't do so well, and trying to imagine what's going to happen. And one of the things that's very clear, I think, is that every time some kind of immigration legislation is passed, there are always unintended consequences. People think that they're going to make things happen a certain way, but realities of history and populations and markets and politics are such that there are just factors you don't take into consideration. So yes, we will have more militarized borders. Yes, we will have a more serious enforcement regime here in the United States. And yes, people will have terrible difficulty jumping through the difficult hoops that are being erected, and it'll be particularly hard because our adult education programs have been gutted. But on the other hand, first of all, just taking the last thing first, this is a population that, with all the educated young people in it, who is better prepared to help itself make it through that process by self-organizing and by mutual aid, by studying together. I've seen a lot of that in the past among farm workers with the 3rd and 4th grade education. And I think the next 10 years are going to see a blossoming of that kind of self-organized community organization in immigrant communities themselves. And secondly, no matter how many boundaries you try to put up between the U.S. and the Mexican border, the reality is that our communities are increasingly like this. I personally have a daughter-in-law who was born in Guanajuato, and it's back and forth, and you know, Mexican and American, and especially Californian and other Southwestern communities, but communities all over the country now, are really tied together more so than any large immigrant group that's ever come to the United States, more so than Italians and Irish and Polish and so on were in the past. And now that people are going to have the power to travel freely, that's going to be deepened, and that's going to really enrich our lives and our communities, and I think it's going to be unstoppable. Finally, I think the many new voting members of this population, even if it will take so many years for this 7 or 8 million people who become temporarily, become provisional legal residents to vote, we already have more than 1.5 million new citizen voters here in California alone in the last 15 years, and the children of these immigrants are all coming up to vote. And every time that a large number of new immigrants become citizens and become participants in public life in this country, we have a big step forward in our social policy and programs and our progressive politics. That's where the New Deal came from. That's where the CIA, it was the children of immigrants and immigrants themselves who did the sit-down strikes in the 1930s. So I believe that this new population of Mexicano mostly, but not only, voters and participants in public life are going to help us to move our country in a progressive direction. At least here in California, we should be able to do that, and it's starting to happen already.
Yeah, as long as they don't think like Mark Rubio, right? So I just want to say that this is a live call-in show, if that is to say if you're watching on the 23rd of June, 2013. The phone number is 831-425-8844. If you have a question about what you've heard tonight, or you wanted to ask a question of our guests, or just something to throw out there, a comment to make, well then please give us a call, 831-425-8844. We're a little bit past the halfway mark on our show, and I know our producer has lined up a clip of Obama giving a speech about his about the immigration reform, kind of his proposal, and sort of just whatever it is that Obama wants to talk about this. So why don't we get ready to cut to that clip, and we'll be right back after this, and we'll do some reactions and hopefully take some of your phone calls.
Hi, everybody. Right now, the United States Senate is debating a bipartisan, common-sense bill that would be an important step toward fixing our broken immigration system. It's a bill that would continue to strengthen security at our borders and hold employers more accountable if they knowingly hire undocumented workers, so they won't have an unfair advantage over businesses that follow the law. It's a bill that would modernize the legal immigration system so that as we train American workers for the jobs of tomorrow, we're also attracting the highly skilled entrepreneurs and engineers who grow our economy for everyone. It's a bill that would provide a pathway to earn citizenship for the 11 million individuals who are in this country illegally, a pathway that includes passing a background check, learning English, paying taxes and a penalty, and then going to the back of the line behind everyone trying to come here legally. And a few days ago, a report from the Congressional Budget Office definitively showed that this bipartisan common sense bill will help the middle class grow our economy and shrink our deficits by making sure that every worker in America plays by the same set of rules and pays taxes like everyone else. According to this independent report, reforming our immigration system would reduce our deficits by almost $1 trillion over the next 2 decades. And it will boost our economy by more than 5%, in part because of businesses created, investments made, and technologies invented by immigrants. This comes on the heel of another report from the independent office that monitors Social Security's finances, which says that this immigration bill would actually strengthen the long-term health and solvency of Social Security for future generations. Because with this bill, millions of additional people will start paying more in taxes for things like Social Security and education. That'll make the economy fairer for middle-class families. So that's what comprehensive immigration reform looks like. Stronger enforcement, a smarter legal immigration system, a pathway to earned citizenship, a more vibrant, growing economy that's fairer on the middle class, and a more stable fiscal future for our kids. Now, the bill isn't perfect. It's a compromise. Nobody's going to get everything they want. Not Democrats, not Republicans, not me. But it's consistent with the principles that I and others have laid out for common sense reform. That's why Republicans and Democrats, CEOs and labor leaders are saying that now's the time to pass this bill. If you agree with us, reach out to your senators and representatives. Tell them that the time for excuses is over. It's time to fix our broken immigration system once and for all. We can do this because we are a nation of laws and a nation of immigrants, a place enriched by the contributions of people from all over the world and stronger for it. That's been the story of America from the start, so let's keep it going. Thanks, and have a great weekend.
There you go. The words of President Obama from whitehouse.gov. Any reactions, folks? It's kind of some interesting things he said there. For me, I think personally, the comment that this bill will save the nation trillions of dollars in not having to continue to enforce these broken immigration laws, and sort of by just various bureaucratic reductions, shall we say, by having a process that's going to actually process these people, we're going to save money in the long run. And then another interesting report that he cited about, legalizing these people and getting them status and having them pay taxes is actually going to be very good for Social Security and kind of these programs that we appreciate that help take care, kind of our social safety net, if you will, right? Like these programs that I think, millions depend on for a sense of Social Security, perhaps. That's what stuck out to me, but I mean, you guys?
Go ahead.
I know it's hard to react to Obama sometimes. I mean, don't get me wrong.
Well, I feel deeply ambivalent about, I felt, and that means strongly supportive and also strongly critical at the same time. That's why it's so deep. I'm strongly supportive enough that I went and worked on Obama's election campaign, but also deeply disappointed in some of the things that he's done. But he's a pragmatic politician, and he feels it's been necessary for him to deport more people, for example, than any president in the history of this country. And some of the things that he has put his support behind, despite very good words, are things that I would think he'd be ashamed of. But it's a political reality that he's attempting to deal with. So I think just for myself, and probably for many of the people in our community anyhow, we have to offer qualified support and recognize, as I was suggesting before, that any immigration reform that makes it through this Congress, it's not really the president that's the problem. Of course, it's the Republicans, especially in the House, but on both sides of the Hill. It is going to be deeply problematic. And on the other hand, I think we all know just how bad policy can be in this country because we have seen it historically. So we have to accept the fact that small steps, as long as they're steps in the right direction, are worth taking.
Right.
For me, hearing Obama reminded me again about something that day workers talk about a lot, which is the issue about E-Verify. As I understand it, under the immigration reform bill, E-Verify will be implemented across the board.
That's right.
And there's already a lot of fear among the day labor community, that means day laborers and their families, about E-Verify, and it's affecting day laborers really every day because some of them have been directly affected by it and either have been fired, or have not gotten jobs that they've applied for. And so, and another thing that comes to mind is just that another requirement of the immigration reform bill is that undocumented immigrants that apply are going to need to prove that they're working or that they gain employment. Now, for those people that don't get formal employment, and that includes the day labor population, most of them that get paid in cash.
Right.
And so something that the National Day Labor Organizing Network is supportive of and has really been trying to get more aware, more people to become aware of, is that this amendment to the bill, it's Amendment 1294, and Senator Cardin proposed it, and it really is going to be a way for day laborers to be able to qualify for citizenship, not necessarily by having to prove that they have employment, formal employment, but by proving that they are volunteers and contribute in a lot of different ways to the community.
Yeah.
I mean, they did so for Hurricane Sandy in New York, and they really, I mean, here locally they do, but really nationwide, day laborers have shown up and have helped in times of crisis.
Yeah.
All over the United States. And so those are the two things that come to mind that affect us on the ground here locally. And then just to touch on what you said about you personally and how you feel ambivalent. I think that in general, at least what I've been hearing from the Latino community, both undocumented and documented people, is that they are ambivalent too. We are ambivalent. I am ambivalent too. And I think it's because over decades and decades, this issue has been put on the table, and there really hasn't been any kind of movement forward. And so I think a lot of people are just waiting to see whether this is really going to be realized.
When was the last big amnesty? Was it like 84, 87, somewhere around there?
Well, legislation was passed in 85, but it's generally referred to as 1989, 1990, because that's when people actually got their status regularized.
Okay. I had a friend's dad say what a great president Ronald Reagan was, because it was like under his administration that so many of these people got, normalized and got status. So it's kind of a funny thing to hear, shall we say, from this very working class, otherwise sane human being. But I just want to remind folks that this is, again, Voices from the Village. We're here with Mireya Gomez-Contreras and Paul Johnston from the Immigration Action Coalition of Santa Cruz County. We are live here Sunday, June 23rd, 2013, and this is a call-in show. Look at that. There's the phone number, 425-8844. We want to hear from you, Santa Cruz. That is to say, if you're watching live right now on June 23rd. Otherwise, you could call Community TV and learn all about our fabulous programs anytime you want. Take some classes, get involved, support your public community television station. And one way you can do that, I'm going to take a quick opportunity to plug it right now since I'm mentioning it, is by tuning in next Friday and Saturday for our first ever fundraising telethon. Yes, that's right. Jerry Lewis does not have a lockdown on the telethon. We can do it too, and we need your help. So Friday, the 28th of June, Saturday, the 29th, from 6 to 9 p.m., we're going to be here live on the air. I really hope to see you there, and we really want to see your support. Just as important as seeing you here or seeing you in front of your couch watching us, we would also appreciate your support. So please. Back to the topic, of course, though. We're talking about immigration reform, the legislation, but also just the movement in general. Mireya, you mentioned that you work with the Day Worker Center. This is a new institution here in town. Could you just announce or share a little bit with people sort of what it is and what you guys do and what's available, what kind of services you provide?
Sure. So the Day Worker Center of Santa Cruz County is a program of the Community Action Board of Santa Cruz County. And we're a nonprofit organization. We opened the center in the Live Oak area in April of this year. And we were really happy to do so because it's really been it's taken about 5 years worth of work of planning and research and fundraising. We have now about 130 or so day workers registered. Wow. And we have over 80 employers that have registered, which means that 80 employers have hired a day worker at least once, if not multiple times. Wow. And so our main goal there is to be able to provide a safe space where employers and day workers can meet, carry out the job negotiation, and get the work done. Right. As far as how the day worker relates to the immigration issue, we do not ask any guest, including employers, day workers, volunteers who come to the center, about their immigration status. That really isn't a part of the job negotiation that takes place. Ultimately, the employer, the person who comes to the center, calls or emails looking for a worker, looking to hire a worker, is the employer. And so he or she, if they're interested, asks those questions directly to the worker.
That's their obligation. It's more their obligation than yours to figure that thing out, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and of course, one of the other things that we do at the center, which is another one of our big program goals, is to be able to be an active or play an active role in what's happening on a national level and on a state level as far as immigration issues. Really, I mean, one of the things that's happening right now is there are day worker centers across the United States that are holding fasts to bring attention to all of the deportations that are happening, and really to send a loud and clear message to the Obama administration to stop deportations, at least during this period where the immigration bill is being discussed and it's being changed. That obviously hasn't happened, and it's worrisome, and it's really, I think, devastating a lot of communities. So, at the Day Worker Center, we are carrying out our activities as planned, and I think day workers and their families are eager to see this move forward and are eager to be benefited by it, both directly and in solidarity with people in our community that are going to be, hopefully, in better situations very soon.
So it sounds to me like you guys provide a service to people that are looking to hire. Do you provide services to any of the folks that you're helping to find positions? Like, are there classes or support groups or anything for the day workers themselves? I've heard that in other models. Is there anything available here in Santa Cruz?
At the center, and I think I understand your question, but at the center, we do provide different kinds of trainings and workshops.
Okay, I'd heard of specifically, I think the Day Worker Center, I think is like in Mountain View or Palo Alto or somewhere over there.
Right.
They offer like English classes and literacy classes. There's paperwork. There's like, a lawyer that visits once a week or something and just has consultations for an hour. Like those kind of, when I say services to the workers, that's sort of what I mean. Is there anything available that you guys are doing?
Employment supportive services, absolutely. Okay. So really anything that workers request to see happen is to be able to help them find jobs and keep their jobs, to build relationships with employers and to build relationships in the community. We find a way to make it happen. Right now we're offering English as a second language classes 3 times a week. We're actually also offering Spanish classes for some of the workers. Health and safety trainings. We give out little booklets so that workers can keep track of the jobs that they go out on, and in the case that we need to respond to a wage theft case. So there's definitely opportunity for a lot of growth and development for workers at the center. And we're real happy to be able to grow our program depending on the need.
Wow, that sounds amazing.
Thank you.
Great. No, that's beautiful work. Solidarity. I mean, this is such this sentiment to me. That's what that conveys. Anything on the state level that you guys find interesting? I think, if I'm not mistaken, I heard Luis Alejo was proposing a driver's license for migrant folk bill. Do either of you know anything about the status of that?
I don't know where it is right now, to be very honest with you.
Yes, that legislation made it through, and I think it was essentially affirming and ensuring what we understood was already going to be the reality, that people who gain provisional legal status will be able to obtain California driver's licenses.
That's awesome.
Yay!
Yeah. It just makes more sense. I mean, to sort of regulate more so than just kind of exclude. That seems like.
Yeah, I think the biggest issue that's hanging out there, and that probably will become more serious over the next few years, is with the implementation of the Affordable Care Act and the extension of employment insurance. Of health insurance to many people who haven't been eligible so far. There are explicit exclusions for not only undocumented folks, but in the immigration reform legislation for people who obtain this provisional legal status, which means that we'll continue to have for years into the future a huge population of uninsured adults in California, unless we can find new strategies on a state level.
Dun, dun, dun.
Unless we can find new strategies on a state level, we're still going to have a huge population of now legal residents, provisional legal residents, who still don't have access to health insurance.
Right.
I think many of them will be working in the fields, and the question is going to be whether we can require their employers to provide health insurance, or whether we need to generate new political will in Sacramento to do that.
What else do you think would need to happen to prepare for some like immigration legislation to pass? And then if it doesn't pass, like what do you think should be a reaction?
Wow, those are 2 big questions.
Yeah, I mean, certainly there are 2 distinct ones, but maybe let's say first, what else do we need to do to help make this legislation pass, and in terms of preparing the society, but also things that we could do to help make it pass? How do our legislators stand locally? Do any of you all know?
Well, we're part of a regional coalition, Central Coast Coalition for Comprehensive Immigration Reform with the Pathway to Citizenship, and in that coalition, which centered in Salinas, so it covers the whole Central Coast, we've taken resolutions to almost every city, from Santa Cruz to King City, to Salinas to Pacific Grove, you name it, and all 3 county governments, and they've all passed resolutions in one form or another supportive of comprehensive immigration reform, and conveyed that. So we're generating a local political consensus. I think the next big challenge in front of us, if the legislation passes, is going to be how to offer support, and that doesn't mean we have to do it for people, but how can our institutions, our employer groups, our unions, our churches, and especially our schools provide a context for people to come together, learn how to fill out the paperwork, help each other fill out the paperwork, and avoid falling through the cracks, in effect, because we don't have the immigration legal resources that we would need to help the probably 80,000 or so people here on the Central Coast who will need help. Doesn't really seem like there's a political will to help the citizens of this country, let alone the undocumented residents of this country. Well, so people have to help themselves, I think. That it kind of boils down to
and each other.
Community organizing, helping each other. Yeah.
Me-Day, yeah?
You know, it's like some of the day workers. I think it might be a little contagious. I'm tending to think in the moment. So that's really a question that I'm going to have to take home with me. I mean, I look forward to what Paul's describing as far as this immigration bill really creating a context where we have to look to each other. And I think that hopefully, I mean, I'm an idealist, but I always think that direct connection and that close connection with our neighbors and with a community like that shows our vulnerability, shows us our similarities, and I'm glad that you said, Paul, that this can actually bring good things. As hard as it will be, as complicated as it will be, as long of a process as it will be, that it can really set up a situation for a lot of us to feel like we're in a tighter knit community.
Even if this legislation fails, I mean, if we look at it in an historical way, 2 years from now, 4 years from now, some such legislation, perhaps even better legislation, will pass. The reality is that immigrants are on the side of history, and extending rights to immigrants is it's the American way, and it's, as somebody said on the streets, right? It's what's built this country, and it'll continue to be the case. And I'm just very optimistic, at least in the long term, about what that's going to mean for the quality of public life. Not to mention culture, not to mention the food.
Yes.
Especially here in California, where I think we are really on the cutting edge of openness and potential change, and we've just begun to see the implications for social and political change in this state already, from the 1.3 new citizens that we've achieved since the mid-1990s. That's going to continue. Of course, if we lose, we're going to have to redouble our efforts. We're going to have a determined and focused effort to get rid of the people who stood in the way. We're going to have to build our political power, and that's just going to make immigrant voices and those of their allies even stronger.
Where would you, both of you, maybe recommend some sources where people could stay informed and up to date on some of these, both the legislation as well as the movement? Like, where can people go? What would be a few things you guys would recommend? Well,
the one thing that I'll say, because it's a place where I go often, and of course it makes a lot of sense, the National Day Labor Organizing Network has an up-to-date website. Really, anytime you go on there, you can find a list of what petitions to sign, who to call in your area to pressure them for any immigration-related issues or bills, what's happening around the country, how you can support locally. So I would say www.ndlon.org is a good place.
Right, and then another good one is United We Dream. Which is the Dreamers Network, the sort of bottom-up social network-based social movement of dreamers who are leading the movement for immigration reform across the country. And if you speak Spanish, it's a good idea to watch Univision, because Univision tends to have the very best news coverage, not only of immigration issues, but of a lot of other issues here on the Central Coast as well.
Wow. That's nice to hear. I tend to be biased against the corporate media. But
well,
we got a good one here locally, huh?
They have some wonderful reporters who just really work
They cover it well.
Their tails off, and they're always there on public issues. And I think the Spanish-speaking community often, I think, is better informed on a lot of public issues than the English-speaking community because of the quality of Univision's news coverage.
That's awesome. It's good to hear. We're almost out of time. Any final words from either of you two?
Well,
you had that magic wand. What would happen? You know, if you could wave it.
If I had the magic wand, what would happen?
Yeah.
We would pass immigration reform, comprehensive immigration reform quickly, and we would have a way here, some infrastructure that we're already thinking about building to be able to help people through that process.
Awesome. Paul?
And I just say I'm very proud to be part of a community that has good, strong, positive values about openness and diversity, and I think the thing that we need more than anything else is young immigrants, especially immigrant community leaders, to step forward and exercise their voice and exercise their power. And those of us in the Anglo community, I think we need to look outside of our own little worlds, which tend to be kind of closed off a little bit, and understand the significance of the possibilities that are now open to us for new friendships, for new relationships. And it's those linkages between our communities that's going to be the key to positive social change here, now, and in the future.
Sounds good to me. Thank you guys so much, Paul Johnston, Mireya Gomez-Contreras. Thank you both for joining us. We want to thank you, Santa Cruz, for tuning in. Again, this has been Voices from the Village. I am Sandino Gomez, the host tonight. I want to thank all of our amazing staff and all of the crew behind the scenes that help make this show possible. I want to again invite you to check out our community television first ever, hopefully first annual telethon this Friday. This Friday, wow, June 28th, and Saturday, June 29th from 6 to 9 p.m. We will see you there. Good night, folks.